Anne Boleyn is the most famous woman Henry VIII ever destroyed. But before Anne, there was another Boleyn sister in the king's bed. She was older. She came first. And when the scaffold finally came for her family, she was the only one who walked away from it. Mary Boleyn is born around 1499, most likely at Blickling Hall in Norfolk. She is the eldest of the 3 Boleyn children who survived to adulthood. After her comes George. After George comes Anne. For most of the last 400 years, historians got that order backwards. They assumed Anne was the elder because Anne was the one sent abroad to be educated, and education abroad was usually the investment a family made in its most promising child. But in 1597, Mary's own grandson petitioned Queen Elizabeth for the earldom of Ormond, and his claim rested on one specific point, that his grandmother had been the elder sister. He was arguing for money. He had no reason to lie about something the heralds could check. Their father is Thomas Boleyn. He is not a nobleman by blood. He is a diplomat, and he is very good at it. He speaks fluent French at a court where most Englishmen do not. He is sent to the Low Countries, to France, to the Habsburg court, and every posting is a rung. Their mother is Elizabeth Howard, daughter of the Duke of Norfolk, and it is her blood that gives the Boleyn children their claim to matter at all. The family seat is Hever Castle in Kent, a moat, a drawbridge, a courtyard you can cross in 20 paces. It is comfortable. It is not grand. Everything the Boleyns will become, they will get by placing their children well. And in the year Mary is born, the boy who will decide all of their lives is 8 years old, and he is not even the heir. Henry VIII is a second son. His elder brother Arthur is the Prince of Wales. Nobody at Hever and nobody at court has any reason to think about him at all. By the time Mary Boleyn is 12, Arthur is dead, Henry VIII is King of England, and Thomas Boleyn has understood the only rule that will ever matter in his household. Everything flows from one man, and the shortest route to that man runs through his daughters. He will send both of them to France to learn how to be useful. Within 15 years, one of them will be in Henry VIII's bed, and the other will be on his throne. In the autumn of 1514, Mary is about 15 years old, and she is chosen for the household of the king's sister. Mary Tudor, Henry VIII's younger sister, 18 years old, and considered the most beautiful princess in Europe, is being sent to France to marry King Louis XII. Louis is 52. He is gouty, exhausted, and has buried 2 wives already. The marriage is a treaty wearing a wedding dress. Mary Boleyn crosses the Channel in the bride's train. It is the first time she leaves England. Louis dies on the 1st day of January, 1515. Less than 3 months after the wedding, the English bride is bundled into mourning, married in secret to the Duke of Suffolk, and shipped home. Most of her English attendants go with her. Mary Boleyn does not. She stays. She is transferred into the household of the new Queen of France, Claude, wife of the young King Francis I, and within a few months her younger sister Anne joins her there. The 2 Boleyn sisters spend the next 4 years inside the most sophisticated, most permissive, most closely watched court in Europe. They learn the same things: French, music, dancing, the art of dressing to be looked at, and the far harder art of knowing which man in a room is worth the risk. Anne Boleyn will use every one of those skills to hold Henry VIII at arm's length for 7 years and end up crowned. Anne will leave France having learned how to hold a room. Mary will leave France with a reputation. Here is what almost every book, film, and television series will tell you about those 4 years. That Mary Boleyn became the mistress of Francis I, and that Francis later called her a great whore, the most infamous of all. That sentence has followed her for 5 centuries. It deserves to be looked at properly. The quote is real in the sense that somebody wrote it down. It appears in a letter from 1536, written by Rodolfo Pio, the papal nuncio in France. Pio is reporting what he says he heard the French king say. Now count the distance in that sentence. Pio is writing about a conversation in a language that is not his own, concerning events that happened between 1515 and 1519, 17 to 21 years earlier, and he is writing it in 1536, the precise year in which the whole of Catholic Europe has an interest in proving that the Boleyn women are exactly what the Pope needs them to be. There is no other source, not a letter, not a household account, not a single line from anyone who was actually in France at the time. What we know for certain is much smaller. Mary Boleyn was young, unmarried, and at a court where the king's attention was a currency. Something happened there, or something was said to have happened there, and it was still worth repeating 20 years later when it became useful. That is the whole of it. Everything else is somebody's guess, repeated until it hardened, and it is worth noticing what was done to the other sister in the same years, by the same people. Anne Boleyn was accused of adultery with 5 men, including her own brother. She was called a witch. She was said to have 6 fingers on one hand. Every single one of those charges was manufactured by men who needed her gone, and most of them are still repeated today. The Boleyn sisters were destroyed twice, once in their lifetimes and once in the retelling. Mary comes home to England in 1519. On the 4th of February 1520, she is married at Greenwich to William Carey. He is a gentleman of the King's Privy Chamber, well-connected, well-liked, distantly related to the royal family, and entirely without a fortune of his own. Henry VIII attends the wedding. We know this because the royal accounts record his offering, 6 shillings and 8 pence, a small sum carefully written down. It is the first hard evidence that the King of England knows who Mary Boleyn is. It is not a coincidence that a woman thought to be, or about to become, the King's mistress is married quickly to a man of the Privy Chamber. It is the arrangement. The husband gains grants, offices, and royal favor. The king gains discretion. Everybody involved understands the terms, and nobody writes them down. 2 years later, at Shrovetide 1522, there is a pageant at York Place. A wooden castle is built inside the hall, painted green, and 8 ladies of the court defend it against 8 gentlemen who besiege it with sweetmeats and rosewater. The ladies play virtues. Mary Boleyn is cast as kindness. Her sister Anne, newly returned from France, is cast as perseverance. Nobody in that hall could have known how exactly the parts had been assigned. Mary Boleyn is Henry VIII's mistress for something like 3 or 4 years, most likely from around 1522 to 1525. And here is the strangest fact of her entire life. Almost nothing about it survives. There are no letters. Henry VIII wrote 17 love letters to Anne Boleyn, and they still exist, sitting in the Vatican Library, because somebody thought they were worth stealing. To Mary, he wrote nothing that anyone kept, or he wrote nothing at all. There are no jewels recorded, no manor houses granted in her name, no scandal at court that anyone bothered to report while it was happening. What we have instead is a pattern of favors falling on the men around her. William Carey collects grants, keeperships, and offices through exactly those years. Thomas Boleyn is made treasurer of the household, and then, in 1525, Viscount Rochford. And in 1523, the king buys a ship from Thomas Boleyn and names her the Mary Boleyn. That is the shape of it. A woman you can only see by looking at what happens to the men standing next to her. Compare that with Elizabeth Blount, the mistress before her, who gave Henry a son in 1519. That boy was acknowledged, given the name Fitzroy, and at 6 years old made Duke of Richmond and Somerset, the highest-ranking peer in England. Henry VIII knew exactly how to make a mistress visible when he wanted to. With Mary Boleyn, he chose not to. There are 2 ways to read that silence, and both of them are grim. The first is that the affair meant very little to him, and a woman who means very little leaves very little behind. The second is more calculated. By 1527, Henry VIII needed Mary Boleyn to have been unimportant. He was assembling a legal argument that would take him to the edge of Europe and past it. And the last thing that argument could survive was a well-documented, publicly celebrated affair with the sister of his intended bride. Either way, the erasure worked. We know more about the king's horses in those years than we know about Mary Boleyn. Mary has 2 children during her marriage to William Carey. Catherine is born around 1524. Henry is born on the 4th of March, 1526. Both are raised as Careys. Both carry their mother's face into the next century. And the question that will not go away is whether either of them was the king's. The timing fits. Both children arrive in the window when Mary was Henry's mistress. Later in the century, people at court said so openly enough that it had to be denied. When a clergyman was reported for claiming that Henry Carey was the king's son, the matter reached the council. The timing is also all we have. Henry VIII acknowledged one illegitimate child in his life, and he did it loudly. He never acknowledged these 2, and he had every reason not to. By 1527, he was building a legal case to marry the children's aunt, and a publicly acknowledged child by Mary would have made that case very much harder to win. So the honest answer is that we do not know, and that the man who did know spent the rest of his life making sure the question stayed unanswered. What is not in doubt is what Henry VIII's daughter thought of them. When Elizabeth I came to the throne, she pulled both Carey children close and kept them there for the rest of their lives. Closer than she kept almost anyone else of Boleyn blood. Whether she was gathering cousins or gathering half-siblings, she never said. She was her father's daughter in that respect. In the summer of 1528, the sweating sickness comes through England. It kills within hours. A man could be well at dinner and dead by morning. The court scatters. Anne Boleyn catches it at Hever and survives. Henry VIII runs from house to house, terrified, taking his physician with him. On the 22nd of June, William Carey dies of it. Mary is left a widow at about 29, with 2 small children, no land of her own, and her late husband's debts. She writes to nobody who answers. Her father, Viscount Rochford, one of the richest men at court, refuses to help her. We know he refuses because the king himself writes to Anne about it, and the phrasing is unmistakable. Henry says that Thomas Boleyn has behaved unnaturally towards his own daughter, and asks Anne to intervene. Anne does intervene, and this is the part of the story that gets flattened whenever these 2 sisters are turned into rivals. Anne takes the wardship of 2-year-old Henry Carey and pays for his education. Anne pushes until Mary is granted a pension of £100 a year. The sister who is about to become queen keeps the sister who used to share the king's bed off the parish rolls. Remember that when you next see the 2 of them written as enemies. In the only documented crisis of Mary Boleyn's adult life, the person who helped her was Anne. There is one more thing Mary Boleyn does to English history, and she does it without lifting a finger. Henry VIII's entire case for annulling his marriage to Catherine of Aragon rests on a single line in the book of Leviticus: "A man shall not take his brother's wife." Catherine had been married to Henry's elder brother Arthur. Therefore, Henry argues, his own marriage was cursed from the beginning, and that is why God has denied him sons. It is a clever argument. It has one enormous problem, and the problem is Mary. Under canon law, sleeping with a woman creates affinity with her family in exactly the same way that marrying her does. Henry had slept with Mary Boleyn. That put him in the first degree of affinity with Anne Boleyn, the identical impediment he was using to break his first marriage. Rome noticed. The dispensation drafted for Henry to marry Anne had to be written to cover affinity arising from unlawful intercourse, in any degree, including the first. So the King of England had to be formally excused on paper for having slept with the sister of the woman he intended to marry. while simultaneously arguing that this exact category of impediment was so absolute that no pope on earth could excuse it. Mary Boleyn never testified. She never wrote a word about it. She simply existed, and her existence sat inside the legal foundation of the English Reformation like a stone in a shoe. Between 1528 and 1534, Mary Boleyn nearly disappears from the record. Her sister does not. Anne is created Marquess of Pembroke in her own right. Anne travels to Calais to be presented to the King of France. Anne is married to Henry in secret in January 1533 and crowned Queen at Westminster on the 1st of June, carried through London under a canopy of gold. Mary is somewhere in that procession. She serves in her sister's household. She is listed occasionally among the Queen's ladies. And that is all. No offices, no grants, no letters. For 6 years, the woman who came first is a name on a household list. In 1534, Mary Boleyn does the only thing in her entire life that she appears to have done purely for herself. She marries William Stafford. Stafford is a soldier of the Calais garrison. He is a younger son of a Northamptonshire family. He has no title, no land, and no prospect of either. By the standards of a queen's sister, he is nobody at all. They marry in secret, without asking the king, without asking the queen, and without asking her father. Then Mary returns to court, and she is visibly pregnant. The reaction is immediate and total. Anne, Queen of England now, still without a son, watching her own position narrow month by month, banishes her from court. Thomas Boleyn cuts her off. Her uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, cuts her off. Her brother George says nothing on her behalf. The family that had placed her, married her, and profited from her closes like a door. And this is where, for the only time in 500 years, we finally hear Mary Boleyn speak. Broke and exiled, she writes to Thomas Cromwell. It is the single surviving letter in her own voice, and it does not read like anything else that came out of that court. She does not apologize for the marriage. She apologizes only for not asking permission first. She writes that love overcame reason. She writes that Stafford loved her when all the world set so little by her. She asks Cromwell to speak to the king, to the queen, to her father, to her uncle, to her brother. And then she writes the sentence that outlived every other word she ever said. I had rather beg my bread with him than to be the greatest queen christened. Consider who is writing that. A woman whose sister is, at that exact moment, the greatest queen in Christendom. A woman who has watched her entire family spend 30 years climbing, arranging, marrying, and calculating, and who has been the currency in more than one of those transactions. She is not being poetic. She is telling the most powerful men in England that she has looked at everything they wanted and decided she would rather have nothing. It does not work. Cromwell does not restore her. Anne sends her a golden cup and some money and never receives her at court again. The two sisters never see each other alive after that. 18 months later, it ends. On the 2nd of May, 1536, Anne Boleyn is arrested and taken to the Tower. On the 15th, she is tried in front of 26 peers, including her own uncle, and convicted of adultery, incest, and treason. On the 17th, her brother George is beheaded on Tower Hill. On the 19th, Anne is beheaded inside the Tower by a swordsman brought over from Calais. Their father is not tried, but he is finished. He surrenders his offices and retires to Havre, where he dies 3 years later. Mary Boleyn is not in London. She is not called as a witness. She is not named in a single deposition. No one troubles to investigate her, because by May 1536, she is exactly what her family made her when they cast her out, nobody. Being nobody is what saves her. The banishment that looked like the ruin of her life turns out to be the reason she is standing somewhere in Essex, married to a man with no title, on the morning her sister's head comes off. Mary Boleyn lives another 7 years, and they are quiet ones. When Thomas Boleyn dies in 1539, the Boleyn lands in Essex pass to her. She and Stafford settle at Rochford Hall. There is no evidence she ever returned to court and no evidence she ever tried. She dies on the 19th of July, 1543, at about 44 years old. The cause is not recorded. Neither is the place she is buried. The most famous family in Tudor England, and the only one of the 3 Boleyn children to die of natural causes, has no known grave. Anne's remains lie under the chancel floor at St. Peter ad Vincula in the Tower. George's are beside them. Mary is simply gone. But her children are another matter entirely. Catherine Carey marries Sir Francis Knollys and has at least a dozen children. When Elizabeth I becomes queen, Anne's daughter, Catherine's first cousin, she brings Catherine to court and makes her chief lady of the bedchamber. They are together almost daily for 11 years. When Catherine dies in 1569, Elizabeth is reported to be inconsolable and pays for a funeral in Westminster Abbey, grand enough for a countess. Henry Carey does even better. Elizabeth makes him Baron Hunsdon, then Lord Chamberlain of the royal household, one of the great offices of state. He commands troops. He sits on the council. And in 1594 he becomes patron of a company of players who take his title as their name, the Lord Chamberlain's Men. Their resident playwright is a man from Warwickshire called William Shakespeare. On his deathbed, Elizabeth offers him the earldom of Ormond, the title his great-grandfather had spent a lifetime chasing. He turns it down. Anne Boleyn changed England. She broke a marriage, broke a church, and put her daughter on the throne. And on the 24th of March, 1603, Elizabeth I died childless, and Anne Boleyn's line stopped where it stood. Mary Boleyn changed nothing. She was married off, used, paid off, cast out, and forgotten so completely that no one wrote down where she was put in the ground. Her line did not stop. Through her daughter Catherine, through Catherine's daughter Lettice, down 15 generations of Devereux and Seymour and Boyle and Cavendish and Bentinck, it reaches a Scottish earl's daughter named Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, who becomes Queen of England in 1936, and it runs from her, unbroken, to the throne of England today. History calls her the other Boleyn girl. She was the one who was never put on trial, never sent to the Tower, and never made to kneel in the straw. She was the one who married a man with nothing because she wanted to. She was the one who said she would rather beg her bread than be the greatest queen in Christendom. And she was the only Boleyn who died in her own bed.